Imagine shaking hands with a warrior, calling him a freedom fighter, giving him millions of dollars, the most advanced weapons in your arsenal, and training him to kill your enemies, only to watch that same man orchestrate the deadliest terrorist attack on your soil 20 years later. This isn't fiction. This is the catastrophic true story of how America created its own monster. Kabul, Afghanistan, December 24, 1979. The night sky over Kabul erupted with the thunder of Soviet transport planes. One after another, massive Antonov aircraft descended onto Kabul's airport, their bellies filled with elite Spetsnaz commandos. By dawn, over 5,000 Soviet troops had secured the Afghan capital. Within 72 hours, 80,000 Red Army soldiers poured across the northern border. Tanks rumbled through mountain passes. Helicopter gunships circled ancient villages. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan had begun. Soviet Premier Leonid Brezhnev had ordered the invasion to prop up Afghanistan's failing communist government. He believed it would be simple, a quick military operation, perhaps a few months, and the Soviets would control their southern neighbor, securing a strategic buffer zone and access to warm water ports. He was catastrophically wrong. But thousands of miles away, in the White House, American President Jimmy Carter saw something different. He saw an opportunity, a chance to give the Soviet Union their own Vietnam, a quagmire that would bleed their economy and destroy their superpower status. "We now have the opportunity of giving to the USSR its Vietnam War," wrote National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski in a memo that would change history. The plan was audacious: fund and arm Afghan resistance fighters to make the Soviet occupation so costly, so bloody, so demoralizing that Moscow would have no choice but to withdraw. But Carter needed warriors on the ground, fierce, fearless fighters who hated communists as much as Washington did. They found them in the mountains. The Mujahideen. The Mujahideen weren't a unified army. They were a collection of tribal warriors, religious students, farmers, and former soldiers united by one thing: hatred of foreign invaders. Some fought for Islam, others for tribal honor, others simply to protect their villages. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and outmatched. Soviet Mi-24 helicopter gunships, flying tanks that Afghans called Shaitan Arba, Satan's chariot, dominated the skies. Soviet T-72 tanks rolled through valleys unopposed. The Red Army had satellite intelligence, night vision, chemical weapons, and unlimited ammunition. The Mujahideen had old British Lee Enfield rifles from World War I and prayers. Until America stepped in. Langley, Virginia, CIA headquarters, March 1980. Inches, a windowless conference room at CIA headquarters. A small group of men gathered around classified briefing documents. CIA Director Stansfield Turner presented President Carter with a covert action plan. The operation would be called Cyclone. The mission was simple in theory, complex in execution. Provide covert support to Afghan resistance fighters without directly involving American troops or triggering World War III. The Soviets could never know America was behind it. Carter approved an initial budget of $20 to $30 million. It seemed like a small gamble. When Ronald Reagan became president in January 1981, he saw Operation Cyclone as the perfect weapon against Soviet expansion. Reagan, the ultimate Cold Warrior, believed in rolling back communism, not just containing it. He dramatically increased funding. The budget grew exponentially. 1980, $20 million. 1982, $40 million. 1984, $250 million. 1985, $250 million. 1986, $470 million. 1987, $630 million. 1988, $630 million. Total, over $3 billion in official funds. When including Saudi Arabia's matching contributions, arranged by CIA Director William Casey, some estimates put the total at $20 billion, making it one of the most expensive covert operations in American history. But money alone wouldn't win this war. The Mujahideen needed weapons, training, and a supply line that couldn't be traced back to Washington. Enter Pakistan. Pakistan's dictator, General Mohammad Zia-ul-Haq, became America's crucial partner. His intelligence agency, the ISI, Inter-Services Intelligence, would serve as the middleman, the buffer between the CIA and the Afghan fighters. The arrangement was brilliant in its deniability. The CIA would funnel cash and weapons to Pakistan. The ISI would distribute everything to Mujahideen commanders. If anything went wrong, America could claim ignorance. Pakistan had its own reasons for helping. A Soviet-controlled Afghanistan meant enemies on both their eastern border, India, and western border, Afghanistan. Zia needed the Soviets gone. The ISI chose which Mujahideen commanders received the most support, and they deliberately favored the most radical Islamic fundamentalists. Men like Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, a brutal warlord known for throwing acid in the faces of women who didn't wear burqas. The CIA objected at first, but the ISI insisted. The most radical fighters were the most committed, the most fearless, the most willing to die. Washington reluctantly agreed. After all, they just needed Soviets killed. They didn't think about what these radical warriors would do after the Soviets left. First catastrophic mistake. Karachi Port, Pakistan, 1984. Cargo ships arrived monthly at Karachi's docks, carrying crates marked as agricultural equipment or humanitarian supplies. Inside were weapons, thousands of tons of weapons. The CIA couldn't send American-made weapons directly. That would be too obvious. Instead, they purchased Soviet-designed weapons from countries like China, Egypt, and Israel, who had captured them from Arab armies. The brilliant part: when these weapons were found on battlefields, Moscow would assume they were captured Soviet equipment or came from other communist countries. The arsenal included AK-47 and AKM assault rifles, hundreds of thousands of them. RPG-7 rocket launchers, perfect for destroying Soviet tanks. DSHK heavy machine guns, could shoot down low-flying aircraft. 82mm mortars, for attacking Soviet bases. Anti-tank mines, to destroy vehicle convoys. Explosives and detonators, tons of C4 plastic explosives. Sniper rifles, including British Lee Enfields and Soviet Dragunovs. From Karachi, Pakistani trucks drove the weapons north to Peshawar, near the Afghan border. From there, Mujahideen fighters loaded them onto horses, donkeys, and their own backs, trekking through mountain passes into Afghanistan. It was the longest supply line in covert warfare history, and it worked. Soviet casualty reports began climbing. Convoys were ambushed. Bases were mortared at night. Officers were assassinated. The mighty Red Army was bleeding. But the Soviets adapted. They started flying higher, staying inside armored vehicles, avoiding mountain passes. Their Mi-24 helicopter gunships still ruled the skies, attacking Mujahideen positions with impunity. The fighters needed something more, something that could reach up and pull those helicopters from the sky. They needed Stinger missiles. The Pentagon, April 1986. The debate raged for months. The FIM-92 Stinger was America's most advanced portable surface-to-air missile, a technological marvel that could lock onto an aircraft's heat signature and bring it down from miles away. It was a fire-and-forget weapon. The operator just had to point, lock, and shoot. The argument against giving Stingers to the Mujahideen: too advanced, the technology might fall into Soviet hands. Too traceable, clearly American-made. Too dangerous. What if these missiles ended up shooting down civilian aircraft? The argument for the war was stalemated. Soviet helicopters were decimating Mujahideen forces. The Soviets were winning. Only the Stinger could tip the balance. Congressman Charlie Wilson, a charismatic Texas Democrat who had become obsessed with the Afghan cause, lobbied relentlessly. CIA Director William Casey supported it. President Reagan approved it. In April 1986, the first Stingers arrived in Pakistan. Jalalabad, Afghanistan, September 26, 1986. The Mujahideen fighters stared at the green tubes with a mixture of awe and confusion. American and Pakistani trainers had taught them the basics: how to identify the target, activate the seeker, wait for the lock tone, and fire. Engineer Gaffer, a Mujahideen commander, shouldered the first Stinger as Soviet Mi-24 helicopters approached. He aimed at the lead gunship, heard the lock tone screaming in his ear, and squeezed the trigger. The missile shot from the tube with a whoosh, leaving a white contrail as it raced toward the helicopter at supersonic speed. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the Mi-24 exploded in a massive fireball. The Mujahideen erupted in celebration, firing their AK-47s into the air. The second helicopter turned and fled. The third crashed trying to evade. Everything changed that day. Within months, Stingers had destroyed dozens of Soviet aircraft. Pilots refused to fly low. Helicopters became vulnerable. The Soviet Air Force, once Afghanistan's greatest advantage, was neutralized. The CIA eventually supplied an estimated 500 to 2,000 Stinger missiles. Exact numbers remain classified. Soviet records show they lost approximately 270 aircraft to Stingers, though the psychological impact was far greater. Pilots were terrified. The tide of war had turned. Peshawar and tribal areas, Pakistan 1985 to 1989. Along the Pakistan-Afghanistan border, in compounds hidden from satellite surveillance, the CIA ran training programs that would later haunt America. Pakistani ISI officers and CIA operatives, who never officially acknowledged their presence, taught Mujahideen fighters military skills, guerrilla warfare tactics, ambush techniques, sniper operations, improvised explosive devices, IEDs, urban warfare, sabotage and demolition, radio communication, intelligence gathering, psychological operations, propaganda techniques, recruitment strategies, psychological warfare against Soviet troops. The training manuals were detailed, professional, and deadly effective. They taught fighters how to make bombs from common materials, how to assassinate targets, how to conduct kidnappings, how to create terror. Second catastrophic mistake. Nobody considered that these skills and manuals would later be used against American forces. Among the thousands who trained in these camps was a tall, quiet Saudi millionaire named Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden arrived in Pakistan in 1980, a 23-year-old from one of Saudi Arabia's wealthiest families. He came with money, idealism, and a belief that Muslims worldwide should join the jihad against the Soviet infidels. He wasn't alone. Thousands of young Muslim men from Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Algeria, Yemen, and other countries flooded into Pakistan to join the fight. They were called Arab Afghans, foreign fighters who came to defend Islam. The CIA and ISI welcomed them. More fighters meant more dead Soviets. Bin Laden used his family fortune and Saudi connections to fund training camps, purchase weapons, build hospitals for wounded fighters, create recruitment networks across the Muslim world, establish financial systems to move money. He worked closely with Abdullah Azzam, a Palestinian scholar who preached that jihad was every Muslim's personal duty. Together, they founded Maktab al-Khidmat, the Services Bureau, which recruited, trained, and deployed thousands of foreign fighters. The CIA knew about bin Laden. Some reports suggest they even worked with him indirectly through the ISI and Saudi intelligence, though this remains disputed. What's undeniable is that America's ally, Saudi Arabia, was funneling money to bin Laden, and the CIA raised no objections. Why would they? He was killing Soviets. He was useful. Third catastrophic mistake. Nobody imagined this Saudi millionaire would become America's most wanted terrorist. February 15, 1989, Termez, Uzbekistan. General Boris Gromov, commander of the Soviet 40th Army, walked across the Friendship Bridge connecting Afghanistan to the Soviet Union. He was the last Soviet soldier to leave Afghanistan. After 10 years, 1 month, and 3 weeks of war, the Soviet Union admitted defeat. They had lost 15,000 soldiers killed, 53,000 wounded, over $50 billion spent, contributing to USSR economic collapse. Hundreds of aircraft destroyed, international prestige shattered. For America, it was a stunning Cold War victory. Operation Cyclone had worked beyond anyone's expectations. The Soviet Union would collapse just 2 years later, in 1991. President Reagan and the CIA celebrated. Congressman Charlie Wilson threw parties. The Mujahideen commanders were heroes. And then, America walked away. The CIA closed its Peshawar station. Funding dried up. The training camps shut down. The embassy in Kabul closed. Afghanistan, after serving its purpose, was forgotten. Nobody asked, what happens to these battle-hardened, ideologically radical, heavily armed fighters now that they have no enemy? Nobody planned for the aftermath. Nobody considered that these warriors might look for new battles, new enemies. Final catastrophic mistake. Afghanistan, 1989 to 1996. Without a common enemy, the Mujahideen turned on each other. Afghanistan descended into civil war as various commanders fought for control. Kabul was destroyed by factional fighting, worse than anything the Soviets had done. In the chaos, a new group emerged. The Taliban, students in Pashto. They were led by Mullah Muhammad Omar, a one-eyed former Mujahideen commander who had fought against the Soviets. Many Taliban fighters had been trained in the same camps the CIA supported. The Taliban's rise was funded partially by Pakistan's ISI, who had distributed CIA weapons years earlier, and supported by Saudi Arabia, America's close ally. In 1996, the Taliban captured Kabul. They imposed strict Sharia law. Women couldn't work or attend school. Music was banned. Men were forced to grow beards, and brutal public executions became common. The world barely noticed. America certainly didn't care. Afghanistan was yesterday's news. Meanwhile, Osama Bin Laden had been busy. After the Soviet withdrawal, he returned to Saudi Arabia briefly, then moved to Sudan, where he continued building his network. In 1996, he returned to Afghanistan, where the Taliban welcomed him as a hero of the Soviet war. From Afghan caves and compounds, Bin Laden founded Al-Qaeda, the base, a global terrorist network. He recruited from the same pool of Arab Afghans who had fought the Soviets. He used the same training techniques the CIA camps had taught. He employed the same guerrilla tactics American advisors had refined. And he declared war on a new enemy, the United States. September 11, 2001, New York City. At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 slammed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. 17 minutes later, United Airlines Flight 175 hit the South Tower. At 9:37 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon. At 10:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 93 crashed in Pennsylvania after passengers fought back. 2,977 innocent people died. The mastermind, Osama bin Laden, the same man America had indirectly supported in Afghanistan 20 years earlier. The hijackers had trained in Al-Qaeda camps in Afghanistan, camps that evolved from the CIA-ISI training infrastructure of the 1980s. The Taliban government in Afghanistan, led by former Mujahideen commanders, refused to hand over bin Laden. On October 7, 2001, America invaded Afghanistan. The war on terror had begun. The bitter irony. American soldiers were now fighting in the same mountains where their government had once supplied weapons to fight Soviets. They were fighting Taliban commanders who had been trained with CIA assistance. They were hunting down Stinger missiles that the CIA had provided. The CIA actually launched a secret buyback program, offering $100,000 per Stinger to recover the missiles they had given away. They recovered some, but hundreds remain unaccounted for, potentially in the hands of terrorist groups worldwide. The Afghanistan War became America's longest conflict. 20 years, 2001 to 2021. 2,461 American soldiers killed. 20,666 American soldiers wounded. Over $2 trillion spent. Tens of thousands of Afghan civilians killed.